I'm going to show you all some of the resources that I found to be helpful and honestly just how I organize them. So I have this binder that I've had for probably about a year. I made it about a year ago. And what I do with this is I take some notes generally on some things that I'm learning. So I had some notes on RabbitMQ. Um, so you can see here consumer, socket buffers, QoS. And I just keep scratch pieces of paper in the front to just jot down notes as I'm reading either books or papers or documentation online because I just can't stand reading things on a screen. I just have to have it in printed form. And I'm a very visual person, so I have to either write it down or I have to at least like underline it or highlight it in order for me to fully grasp it. Somebody can be telling me something, but I'm just not an auditory learner. That's just not how I learn. Um, and so I have this divided into ebooks. So I have one section with ebooks here, and one of the difficulties of a large binder is that it's hard to flip the pages. But oh, let me move this back. If you watch my channel at all, you know that this is about the quality that you're going to get here. But I have a section for ebooks, which starts with containerized Docker applications with Microsoft Platform and Tools. Microsoft publishes really good ebooks, but they're online. So I do my best to print off some of them so I can, because they're free PDFs, so you can print them off. And I try to keep a record of them because there's really good information. Again, they're free ebooks that Microsoft puts out there. I'm sure that they update it, so like you probably like will want to go back and make sure that you have the most up-to-date version. But this is really good. This helped me learn a lot about containerization, Docker in the context of .NET, and it's really reliable information. I found that a lot of information about Docker and containers, it's not reliable, and it feels like a lot of it is like secondhand, third-hand source information, right? It feels like somebody read an article and then wrote their own version of that article. It's hard to find quality information, but Microsoft has really reliable ebooks about .NET, Docker, containerization, so much stuff, DevOps. So it's really good information. So I printed out hundreds of pages from the PDFs, and again, they're really good. So I've read those, and I have another section for research papers that I found that have been really good too. Research papers again are they're hard to find that are free because a lot of them, especially if they're newer, are going to be behind some kind of paywall. You have to either subscribe to the site that's hosting that paper or the publisher that the paper was published under. But a lot of older ones have been made free now and public. So, like this one is about Dremel, interactive analysis of scale databases. This one is a paper about OAuth. And this one was really fascinating to read because authentication is something that people like to talk about and make it seem like it's easy. But this paper, they did a study and they found that they did a study on 149 major applications and found that only 59.7 were incorrectly 59.7% of them were incorrectly implemented and were vulnerable to OAuth vulnerabilities from bad implementation. So I feel like the deeper down the rabbit hole you go, the more you realize how brittle things are, and it's important that we stay up to date on best practices. But OAuth is hard to fully get right because, again, at some point you have to pass tokens around, and the sheer fact that a token is being sent over a network exposes a vulnerability. And so that's why we have redirects. That's why we have external identity providers to basically put up this facade so that somebody, if they're looking at it, doesn't know that request who it's coming from, who it was authenticated by, and also what that token means. And there's all kinds of encryption algorithms, but it's easy to get wrong, and that's what papers really illuminate for me, that fact. I have another one about OAuth, just understanding the core principles of OAuth. I have another one called Making Data Structures Persistent, which is published in '89, and again, it's made free, but it's very, very good information. It really helped me to visually think about data structures, nodes, and it really this because I've watched data structure videos, I've read several books on data structures and algorithms, but sometimes it's hard to like actually think about them in a way where it's not. I don't know. Something about this paper really helped me to think about it in a different way. And sometimes all it takes is you thinking about a more abstract concept in a different way for it to finally click. You can read something 3 times and still not get it. But then you can read something different that describes the topic in a little bit different way, that it just clicks for you. And I feel like this paper is helping me on my way to making data structures click in my mind. I'm sure that, it's not exactly the most entertaining of read, but for me, something about just, I don't know, the visuals and just the way it talked about it was really interesting. It talked about fat nodes. It talked about just basically a node containing all the information of the other nodes in a way to make data persistent across the whole structure. Was really, really fascinating. And I made content a couple years ago on this topic about and applying it to .NET if you're interested in it. But it's very fascinating, and there's a lot of applications in terms of data security, data resiliency, and especially if you couple that with any semblance of using queues to move data across systems, you can make really, really powerful stuff. And this paper was published in 1989. So I talk about books a lot on this channel, and I'm going to attempt to close my binder, but this binder is it's so hard to close binders, like especially like the 3-inch ones if you have those laying around, because they have a tendency to open up when you fold the pages over, and once that happens, you're done for. Then you have to like go back and reorganize the whole thing because your pages came out, and we got it. All right, I'm gonna set that aside. Anyway, so I've talked a lot about books on this channel, and you know how I feel about books, especially when it relates to software engineering, because I feel like there's such valuable information that gets glossed over because it's not trendy, or it's not, it doesn't use the most exciting language. There's nobody, yelling crazy things on a camera, doing a bunch of, chain shots to explain this concept. Books are they're just written, and they're for you to discover. And so there's a lot of really, really interesting and obscure topics that really only exist in books because somebody decided, to take the time to write it and get it published. But people have to read it, and unfortunately, a lot of more obscure topics go a little bit unnoticed because sometimes they're not the most exciting of read, compared to reading like a 5-minute article. And that's just the reality of the modern world. But if you can try to find papers and ebooks and stuff that's not as popular of information and compile it into a collection of resources for you, I think it can be really helpful. And I've tried to do this on the channel. I've posted links to all the papers that I've talked about, or not links, but titles of the papers that I've talked about. I've posted the titles of the books. I've posted so many resources that I found that you can go back and find on my channel. But that's really that's one of my goals for this whole thing is to help people discover resources that you might not think about, or to kind of demystify the whole thing, right? Because sometimes it's easy to make this stuff sound overly complicated. and it's easy to make it also but on one hand but on the other hand it's also easy to make it sound overly simplified, and there's a fine balance between the two. You have to present it as is, but you have to present information that talks about it more with the presentation of it's still an open problem, because software engineering is so new that there's so many problems that are lingering that were brought up in the early 70s, early 80s that still exist, and people are trying to still solve them. So there's still so many open problems that exist that you can tackle, that you can try to figure out. So if you come across something that just doesn't seem that just doesn't feel right, maybe you're implementing uh, I don't know who you're implementing some protocol that has existed for decades, and you feel like you can do it better. There's nothing stopping you from actually sitting down and writing some kind of thesis out and trying to create something better and present that, and then see what you can do, because that's what this whole career and honestly just discipline of study is about, is taking what is there and building upon it and trying to make it better, but also trying to solve problems. You don't have to solve the biggest problem, but if you solve a small tiny problem, then there you go. That's what it's all about. So try to find some resources. There's a lot out there. Sometimes they're hard to find, and I I've really tried to put a lot of time into, especially last year, into trying to find what good resources are. Because of probably the 30 books in software engineering that I read last year, I would probably recommend about 15 of them. And it's difficult to find quality sources. It's hard to find credible sources, but when you do, you just know you did something about it. You just this is good information. So let me know what y'all find. Let me know if you have a good strategy for finding good resources for software development. So thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.